Welcome to Trench Diaries. This is Stuka Pilot, part 10. We take off very early so as to be up in the forward area at the crack of dawn, for we can be certain that Ivan will also have made good use of the interval. The foulest weather, cloud ceiling 300 to 450 feet over the airfield. Once again, St. Peter is helping the other side. The surrounding hills are obscured. We can only fly along the valleys. I am curious as to what is in store for us today. We fly past Falesti. There, everything is wreckage just as we left it yesterday. Due south of Balti, we meet the first armored and motorized convoys. We are greeted by fierce opposition from both flak and fighter aircraft. It must have got round that we put up a good show yesterday. I should not much care to make a forced landing hereabouts today. We attack without intermission. On every sortie we are engaged in aerial combat without protection, for in this sector there are virtually none of our fighters available. In addition, we have plenty of trouble with the weather. Through having to fly low all the time, we are not without losses. But we have to keep at it, for we are dealing with an emergency and it is in our own interest not to let up for an instant. Unless we stay in the air, it will not be long before Ivan occupies our airfield. It is unfortunate that I no longer have Henschel with me on these difficult sorties. With his gunnery experience, the brave fellow would have been able to make things a whole lot easier for me. Today my rear gunner is Warrant Officer Rothmann, a good chap, but he lacks experience. We all like flying with him because we say, even if no one else gets back, you can bet old Rothmann will. On our return from the first sortie, I am again impatient at the delay and sandwich in a solo, accompanied by Pilot Officer Fischer. We go out after tanks on the outskirts of Balti. We have a rendezvous with a few fighters over the target. We fly there as low as possible, the weather is worse than ever, visibility is no more than 800 yards. I look for our fighters climbing shortly before we reach the town. There are fighters there, but not ours, all Russians. Look out, Fischer, they're all Era Cobra. Stick to me, come in closer. But they have already spotted us. There are about 20 of them. We two alone are just their meat. They come at us confidently, hell for leather. There is no airspace up above. We are flying at bottom level, taking advantage of every little gully in the effort to lose ourselves. I cannot take any violent evasive action because I cannot kick the rudder with my feet. I can only make varied changes of direction by pulling my joystick. These tactics are not good enough by a long chalk if I have behind me a fighter pilot who knows the first thing about his business. And the one now on my tail knows all about it. Rothmann shows signs of the jitters. They are shooting us down! They are shooting us down! I yell at him to shut up, to fire instead of wasting his breath. He gives a shout. There is a rat-tat-tat against my fuselage, hit after hit. I cannot shift the rudder bar. A blind rage possesses me. I am beside myself with fury. I hear the impact of large caliber shells. The Airacobra is firing with a 37mm cannon in addition to its 20mm guns. How long will my faithful Ju-87 hold out? How long before my kite bursts into flames or falls apart? I've been brought down 30 times in this war, but always by flak, never yet by fighters. Every time I was able to use the rudder bar and maneuver with the aid of it. This is the first and last time a fighter hits my aircraft. Rothmann, goddammit, fire! He doesn't answer. His last word is, I'm jammed! Ouch! So now my rear defense is eliminated. The Ivans are not slow to grasp the fact. They become even more aggressive than before, coming in behind me and from port and starboard. One fellow comes at me again and again with a frontal pass. I take refuge in the narrowest ravines where there is barely room to squeeze through with my wings. Their marksmanship against their living target is not bad. They score one hit after another. The chances of my getting back are once again very small. But close to our own airfield at Yassi, they abandon the chase. Presumably, they've run out of ammunition. I have lost Fischer. He was diagonally behind me all the time, and I could not keep track of him. Rothmann, too, does not know what has happened to him. Has he made a forced landing, or has he crashed? I do not know. The loss of the smart young officer hits the squadron particularly hard. My aircraft has been riddled by the 20mm guns and hit 8 times by the 37mm cannon. Rothmann would no longer ensure my life for very much. After such an experience, one is mentally harassed and exhausted, but that cannot be helped. Into another aircraft and off again. The Soviets must be halted. On this day I knock out 9 tanks, a heavy day. During the last sorties I have to peel my eyes to catch sight of a tank. This is a good sign. I believe that for the moment the main impetus of the enemy has been stemmed. Infantry by itself without armor makes no great forward leaps. Dawn reconnaissance the next morning confirms my supposition. Everything seems quiet, almost dead. As I land after the first sortie of the day, a young airman springs onto the wing of my aircraft with wild gesticulations and congratulates me on the award of the Diamonds. A long-distance message has just been received from the Führer, but it also includes an order forbidding me to fly anymore. Some of his words are drowned by the noise of the running engine, but I guess the drift of what he is telling me. To avoid seeing this prohibition in black and white, I do not go into the control room but remain close to my aircraft until the preparations for the next takeoff are completed. At noon, the general summons me to Odessa by telephone. Meanwhile, telegrams of congratulation have been pouring in from every point of the campus, even from members of the Reich government. It is going to be a hard fight to obtain leave to continue flying. The thought that my comrades are getting ready for another sortie and that I have to go to Odessa upsets me. I feel like a leper. This rider to the award disheartens me and kills my pleasure at the recognition of my achievement. In Odessa, I learn nothing new, only what I already know and do not wish to hear. I listen to the words of congratulation absently. My thoughts are with my comrades who do not have this worry and can fly. I envy them. I am to proceed immediately to the Führer's headquarters to be personally invested with the diamonds. After stopping off at Tiraspol, we change over to a Ju-87. If only Henschel were here with me, now Rothmann sits behind. Over Foscani, Bucharest, Belgrade, Kecskemét, Vienna to Salzburg. It is no everyday occurrence for the head of the state to receive an officer reporting in soft fur flying boots, but I am happy to be able to move about in them, even though in great pain. Wing Commander von Below comes in to Salzburg to fetch me while Rothmann goes home by train, it being agreed that I shall picking up in Silesia on my way back. For 2 days I bask in the sun on the terrace of the Berchtesgadener Hotel, inhaling the glorious mountain air of home. Now gradually I relax. 2 days later I stand in the presence of the Führer in the magnificent Berghof. He knows the whole story of the last fortnight down to the minutest detail and expresses his joy that the fates have been so kind that we were able to achieve so much. I am impressed by his warmth and almost tender cordiality. He says that I have now done enough, hence his order grounding me. He explains that it is not necessary that all great soldiers should lay down their lives. Their example and their experience must be safeguarded for the new generation. I reply with a refusal to accept the decoration if it entails the stipulation that I may no longer lead my squadron into action. He frowns. A brief pause ensues, and then his face breaks into a smile. Very well then, you may fly. Now at last I am glad and happily look forward to seeing the pleasure in the faces of my comrades when they hear that I am back. We have tea together and chat for an hour or two. New technical weapons, the strategic situation and history are the staple of our conversation. He specially explains to me the V weapons which have recently been tried out. For the present, he says, it would be a mistake to overestimate their effectiveness because the accuracy of these weapons is still very small, adding that this is not so important as he is now hopeful of producing flying rockets which will be absolutely infallible. Later on, we should not rely, as at present, on the normal high explosives, but on something quite different which will be so powerful that once we begin to use them, they should end the war decisively. He tells me that their development is already well advanced and that their final completion may be expected very soon. For me, this is entirely virgin ground and I cannot yet imagine it. Later I learned that the explosive effect of these new rockets is supposed to be based on atomic energy. The impression left after every visit to the Führer is enduring. From Salzburg I fly the short distance to Görlitz, my hometown. All the receptions given in my honor are more of a strain than some operational sorties. Once when I am lying in bed at 7 o'clock in the morning, a girls' choir serenades me. It requires a good deal of persuasion on the part of my wife to make me say good morning to them. It is hard to explain to people that in spite of being decorated with the diamonds, one does not want any celebrations or receptions. I want to rest, and that is all. I spent a few more days with my parents in my home village in an intimate family gathering. I listen to the news bulletins from the east on the wireless and think of the soldiers fighting over there. Then nothing holds me back any longer. I ring up Rothmann at Zittau and the Ju-87 flies over Vienna, Bucharest, southwards to the Eastern Front once more. Chapter 14. Fateful Summer 1944. A few hours later I land at Foscani in the North Romanian zone. My squadron is now stationed at Huzi, a little to the north. The front is very much more firmly held than it was a fortnight ago. It runs from the Prut to the Dniester along the edge of the plateau north of Jassy. The little town of Huzi nestles among the hills. Some of these heights have extensive vineyard terraces. Are we in time for the vintage? The airfield is situated on the northern rim of the town, and as our billets are directly on the opposite side of it, we have to go through the streets every morning on our way to dispersal. The population watches our activities with interest. When one talks to them, they always show their friendliness. The representatives of the church especially maintain close contact with us, following the lead given by the bishop, whose guest I often am. He's never tired of explaining that the clergy see in our victory the only possible chance of keeping religious liberty and independence, and that they long for it to come with the least possible delay. There are many tradesmen in the town. The place is full of little shops. This is very different from Soviet Russia, which we have left so recently, where the middle class has vanished, swallowed up by the proletarian Moloch. What especially strikes me as I walk through the town is the enormous number of dogs. To all appearances, these hordes are masterless. They roam around and one meets them at every corner and on every square. I am temporarily quartered in a little villa with a vineyard, on one side of which flows a small stream where one can bathe. Whole processions of dogs wander through this vineyard in the night. They move in Indian file, in packs of 20 or 30. One morning I am still abed when a huge mongrel looks in at my window with his forepaws on the sill. Behind him, likewise standing on their hind legs, are 15 of his colleagues. They rest their forepaws on the back of the dog in front, all peering into my room. When I chase them away, they slink off sadly and without barking back to their restless prowling. There is no shortage of food. We live well, for we receive our pay regularly, and even if there's not much worth buying, there are always eggs. Consequently, almost the whole of our pay is converted into eggs. Flight Officer Stähler holds the record of egg consumption among the officers. He puts away astounding quantities. On days when shortage of petrol makes it impossible to fly, this new source of energy is immediately put to the test. The whole squadron, to a man, takes some form of exercise. Generally, a long cross-country run, gymnastics, and, of course, a game of football. I still find these exertions painful because the soles of my feet are not yet quite healed and my shoulder hurts me if I move it injudiciously. But for the squadron as a whole, these ultra-routine sports are a splendid recreation. Some, and I am the keenest among them, take advantage of this extra leisure to stroll in the mountain woods or to practice some other sport. Usually, we drive to the airfield for the takeoff between 4 and 5 a.m. On the far side of the town, we always run into a huge flock of sheep with a donkey walking in front. The donkey's eyes are almost completely covered by a long and straggling mane. We wonder how he can manage to see at all. Because of this mane, we nickname him Eclipse. One morning, as we squeeze past, we tweak his tail for fun. The shock provides a whole series of reactions. First, he lets fly with his hind legs like a kicking horse, then, remembering his asinine nature, he stands stock still, and lastly, his chicken heart begins to thump and he streaks off like the wind. The flock of sheep entrusted to his care, of course, understand nothing of this unusual contretemps, still less of a reason for his kicking and herring off. When they see that the donkey has left them in the lurch, the air is filled with a pandemonium of bleating, and suddenly the sheep set off at a gallop in pursuit. Even if we meet with heavy opposition on our first sortie, we do not care, for we still see the picture of this comic animal performance, and our hearts are light with the joy of living. The gaiety robs the danger of the moment of its meaning. Our missions now take us into the relatively stabilized sector where, however, the gradual arrival of reinforcements indicates that the Reds are preparing a thrust into the heart of Romania. Our operational area extends from the village of Tagul Frumos in the west to some bridgeheads over the Dniester. Most of our sorties take us into the area north of Jassy. Between these points, here the Soviets are trying to oust us from the high ground around Karbiti near the Prut. The bitterest fighting in this sector rages around the ruins of the castle of Stanka on the so-called Castle Hill. Time and again we lose this position and always recapture it. In this zone the Soviets are constantly bringing up their stupendous reserves. How often do we attack the river bridges in this area? Our route is over the Prut to the Dniester, beyond Kishinev and further east. Koshnitsa, Grigoriopol and the bridgehead at Butor are names we shall long remember. For a short period, comrades of the 52nd Fighter Wing are stationed with us on our airfield. The CO is Squadron Leader Barkhorn, who knows his job from A to Z. They often escort us on our sorties and we give them plenty of trouble, for the new Yak-3, which has made its appearance on the other side, puts up a show every now and then. A group advanced base is operating from Yassi, from where it is easier to patrol the airspace above the front. The group captain is often up in the front line to observe the cooperation of his formations with the ground troops. His advanced post has a wireless set which enables him to pick up all radio interchanges in the air and on the ground. The fighter pilots talk to one another, the fighters with their control officer, the Stukas among themselves, with their liaison officer on the ground and others. Normally, however, we all use different wavelengths. A little anecdote which the group captain told us on his last visit to our dispersal shows the extent of his concern for his individual lambs. He was watching our squadron approaching Yassi. We were heading north, our objective being to attack targets in the castle area which the army wanted neutralized after making contact with our control. We were met over Yassi not by our own fighters but by a strong formation of lags. In a second the sky was full of crazily swerving aircraft. The slow Stukas were ill-matched against the arrow-swift Russian fighters, especially as our bomb load further slowed us down. With mixed feelings the group captain watched the battle and overheard this conversation. The skipper of the 7th flight, assuming that I had not seen a Lag 5 which was coming up from below me, called a warning. "Look out! One of them is going to shoot you down!" I had spotted the blighter a long time ago, but there was still ample time to take evasive action. I dislike this yelling over the radio, it upsets the crews and has a bad effect on accuracy. So I replied, "The one who shoots me down has not yet been born." I was not bragging, I only meant to show a certain nonchalance for the benefit of the other pilots, because calmness in an awkward spot like this is infectious. The Commodore ends his story with a broad grin. "When I heard that, I was no longer worried about you and your formation. As a matter of fact, I watched the scrap with considerable amusement." How often when briefing my crews do I give them this lecture? Any one of you who fails to keep up with me will be shot down by a fighter. Anyone who lags behind is easy meat and cannot count on any help. So, stick closely to me. Flag hits are often flukes. If you are out of luck, you are just as likely to be hit on the head by a falling slate from a roof or to fall off a tram. Besides, war is not exactly a life insurance. The old stagers already know my views and maxims. When the newcomers are being initiated, they hide a smile and think, "He may be right about that." The fact that they have practically no losses due to enemy fighter interception corroborates my theory. The novices must of course have some proficiency by the time they reach the front, otherwise they are a danger to their colleagues. A few days later, for instance, we are out in the same operational area and are again attacking under strong enemy fighter interference. As the recently joined pilot officer Rehm follows the aircraft in front of him into a dive, he cuts off the other's tail and rudder with his propeller. Luckily, the wind carries their parachutes into our own lines. We spiral round them until they reach the ground, because the Soviet fighters make a regular practice of opening fire on our crews when they have bailed out. After a few months with the squadron, Pilot Officer Rehm has become a first-rate airman who is soon able to lead a section and often even acts as flight leader. I have a fellow feeling for those who are slow to learn. Pilot Officer Schwirblatt is not so lucky. He has already 700 operational sorties to his credit and has been decorated with the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. He has to make a forced landing after being hit in the target area just behind the front line and loses his left leg as well as some fingers. We are to be together again in action in the final phases of the war. We are given no respite in the air, not only in the area north of Yassi but also in the east, where the Russians have established their bridgeheads over the Dniester. 3 of us are out alone one afternoon in the loop of the Dniester between Koshnitsa and Grigoriopol, where large numbers of T-34s have penetrated our defenses. Pilot Officer Fickel and a warrant officer accompany me with bombers. Our own fighters are supposed to be waiting for us, and as I approach the loop of the river, I can already see fighters flying low in the target area. Being an optimist, I jump to the conclusion that they are ours. I fly on towards our objective, searching for tanks, when I realize that the fighters are not my escort at all, but are all Ivan's. Stupidly, we have already broken our formation in quest of individual targets. The other two do not immediately close up and are slow in coming in behind me. Furthermore, as bad luck will have it, these Ivans are up to scratch. That doesn't happen too often. The warrant officer's aircraft very quickly bursts into flames and becomes a torch, vanishing westward. Pilot Officer Fickel calls out that he too has been hit and shears off. A Lag 5 pilot who evidently knows his business is bang on my tail, with several others not quite so close behind him. Whatever I do, I cannot shake off the lag. He has partly lowered his flaps to check his speed. I fly into deep ravines so as to entice him far enough down to make the danger of touching the ground affect his aim. But he stays up and his tracer bullets streak closely past my cockpit. My gunner Gardermann yells excitedly that he will shoot us down. The ravine broadens somewhat southwest of the river loop, and suddenly I bank round with the lag still persistently on my tail. Behind me, Gardermann's gun is jammed. The tracers shave the underside of my left wing. Gardermann shouts, "Climb, climb!" I reply, "I can't. I have the stick in my stomach as it is." It has been slowly puzzling me how the fellow behind me can follow my banking tactics in his fighter. Once again, the sweat is running down my forehead. I pull and pull my sticks, the tracers continue to zip under my wing, and by turning my head, I can look straight into the Ivan's tensely sad face. The other lags have given up, apparently waiting for their colleague to bring me down. This kind of flying is not their cup of tea. Vertical banking at 30 to 45 feet level. Suddenly, on the top of the escarpment, German soldiers. They wave like mad, but have seemingly failed entirely to grasp the situation. Now, a loud whoop from Gardermann. "The lag is down! He's down!" Did Gardermann shoot her down with his rear machine gun, or did she crash because the longerons cracked under the terrific pressure of these high-speed turns? I couldn't care less. In my headphones I hear a mighty yelling from the Russians, a babble of noise. They have seen what has happened, and it appears to be something out of the ordinary. I have lost sight of Pilot Officer Fickel and fly back alone. Below me, a burning Ju-87 lies in a field. The warrant officer and his gunner are both standing safely near it, and German soldiers are coming towards them. So they will be back tomorrow. Shortly before landing, I catch up with Pilot Officer Fickel. There will be ample reason for celebrating my Fickel's and Gardemann's birthday. They too insist upon celebrating. The following morning, the flying control officer of this sector rings up and tells me how anxiously they watched yesterday's performance and congratulates me heartily in the name of the division. A radio message picked up last night revealed that the fighter pilot was a quite famous Soviet ace, several times hero of the USSR. He was a very good aviator, that much I must give him. Very shortly after this, I have to report on two separate occasions to the Reichsmarschall. The first time, I land at Nuremberg and proceed to his ancestral castle. As I enter the courtyard, I am greatly surprised to see Göring with his personal medical attendant rigged out in a medieval German hunting costume and shooting with a bow and arrow at a gaily colored target. At first, he pays no attention to me until he has shot off all his arrows. I am amazed that not one of them misses its mark. I only hope that he is not seized with the ambition to show off his sporting prowess by making me compete with him. In that case, he is bound to see that with my shoulder I cannot hold the bow, let alone draw it. The fact that I am reporting to him in fur boots anyhow gives some indication of my physical infirmities. He tells me that he occupies much of his leisure time at this sport. It is his way of keeping fit, and the doctor, willy-nilly, has to join him in this pastime. After a simple lunch in the family circle, at which General Lörzer is the only other guest, I learn the reason for my summons. He invests me with the Golden Pilot's Medal with diamonds and asks me to form a squadron equipped with the new Messerschmitt 410 armed with a 50mm cannon and assume command of it. He hopes with this type to achieve a decisive ascendancy over the four-engined aircraft used by the enemy. I draw my own conclusions, namely that as I have recently been decorated with the diamonds, his object is to turn me into a fighter pilot. I feel sure that he is thinking back to the First World War, in which airmen who had the pour le mérite were regularly fighter pilots like himself. He has had a predilection for this branch of the Luftwaffe and for those who belong to it ever since, and would like to include me in this category. I tell him how much I would have liked to become a fighter pilot early on and what accidents prevented it. But since those days I have gained valuable experience as a dive bomber pilot and am dead against a change. I therefore beg him to abandon the idea. He then tells me that he has the Führer's approval for this commission, though he admits he was not particularly pleased at the idea of my giving up dive bombing. Nevertheless, the Führer agreed with him in wishing that I should on no account make another landing behind the Russian front to rescue crews. This was an order. If crews had to be picked up, then in future it should be done by someone else. This worries me. It is part of our code that anyone brought down will be picked up. I am of the opinion that it is better that I do it because with my greater experience it must be easier for me than for anyone else. If it has to be done at all, then I am the one who should do it. But to raise any objections would be a waste of time. At the critical moment, one will act as necessity dictates. 2 days later, I am back again in operations at Husi. During a lull of several days, I decide to make a short trip to Berlin for a long-deferred conference. On the return journey, I land at Görlitz, stop off at my home, and continue eastward via Wörslau near Vienna. Early in the morning, I am rung up at the house of my friends. Somebody has been ringing me up all night. A telephone message from the Reichsmarschall's HQ having been put through to Husi, they have been trying to contact me all along my itinerary but have failed to reach me anywhere. I immediately put through a call and Göring's adjutant tells me to proceed at once to Berchtesgaden. As I guess that this is another unwelcome attempt to have me seconded for staff or special duties, I ask him, "From my point of view, is this good or bad?" He knows me. "Certainly not bad, sir." Not altogether without misgivings, I first fly low along the Danube. The weather is the worst imaginable. 120 feet cloud ceiling, no takeoff or landings allowed at almost every aerodrome. The Vienna woods are continuously wreathed in the densest clouds. I fly up the valley from St. Pölten to Amstetten, heading from Salzburg where I land. Here I am already expected and am driven to the Reichsmarschall's country house not far from the Berghof on the Obersalzberg. He is absent in conference with the Führer and we are at table when he returns. His daughter Edda is already a big and well-brought-up girl. She is allowed to sit down with us. After a short constitutional in the garden, the conversation takes an official turn, and I am all agog to know what is in the wind this time. House and garden are in really good taste, nothing vulgar or ostentatious. The family leads a simple life. Now I am officially given audience in his bright and many-window study, with a glorious panorama of the mountains glittering in the late spring sunshine. He evidently has a certain foible for old customs and costumes. I am really at a loss to describe the garment he is wearing. It is a kind of robe or toga, such as the ancient Romans wore, of a russet color and held together with a gold brooch. I cannot precisely describe it. For me, at all events, it is a novel rig out. He is smoking a long pipe, reaching to the floor with a prettily painted porcelain bowl. I can remember my father having possessed a similar instrument. In those days, the pipe was taller than I. After eyeing me in silence for a while, he begins to speak. I am here again for another decoration. He pins on my chest the golden front service medal with diamonds in recognition of my recently completed 2,000 sorties. It is an absolutely new kind of medal, never before awarded to anyone, for no one but I had flown so many sorties. It is made of solid gold with, in the center, a platinum wreath with crossed swords, beneath which is the number 2000 in tiny diamonds. I am glad that there are no unpleasant strings attached to this errand on which I have come. Then we discuss the situation, and he thinks I ought to lose no time in returning to my base. I intended to do so in any case. He tells me that a large-scale offensive is in preparation in my sector and that the balloon will go up in the next few days. He has just returned from a conference in which the whole situation has been discussed in minutest detail with the Führer. He expresses surprise that I have not noticed these preparations on the spot, as approximately 300 tanks are to be employed in this operation. Now I prick my ears. The number 300 flabbergasts me. This is an everyday occurrence on the Russian side, but on ours it is no longer credible. I reply that I find some difficulty in believing it. I ask if he is at liberty to divulge the names of the divisions with the number of tanks they each have at their disposal, because I am exactly informed about most units in my sector and their complement of serviceable tanks. On the eve of my departure from the front, I had spoken with General Unrein, commanding the 14th Armored Division. That was a fortnight ago, and he had complained bitterly to me that he had only one tank left, and even that was actually hors de combat because he had built into it all the flying control apparatus, and this was essentially more valuable to him than a serviceable tank, for with good intercommunications we Stukas were able to neutralize for him many objectives which his tanks could not put out of action. I therefore know the strength of the 14th Armored Division exactly. The Reichsmarschall can hardly believe me, as he thinks he has heard a different figure for this division. He says to me, half in earnest, half in jest, "If I didn't know you, for 2 pins I would have you put under arrest for saying such a thing, but we will soon find out." He goes to the telephone and is connected with the Chief of the General Staff. "You have just given the Führer the figure of 300 tanks for Operation X." The telephone is loud, I can overhear every word. "Yes, I did. I want to know the names of the divisions concerned with their present strength and tanks. I have somebody with me who is well acquainted with the position." "Who is he?" asks the Chief of the General Staff. "He is one of my men who must know." Now the Chief of the General Staff has the bad luck to begin with the 14th Armored Division. He says it has 60 tanks. Göring can hardly contain himself. "My man reports that the 14th has 1. A lengthy silence at the other end of the line. "When did he leave the front?" 4 days ago. Again silence. Then, 40 tanks are still on their way to the front. The rest are in repair shops on the line of communications, but will certainly reach their units by 0 day, so that the figures are correct." He has the same answer for the other divisions. The Reichsmarschall slams down the receiver in a rage. "So that's how it is. The Führer is given a totally false picture based on incorrect data, and is surprised when the operations do not have the success expected. Today, thanks to you, it is accidentally explained, but how often we may have built our hopes on such utopias. The southeastern zone with its network of communications is being incessantly blanketed by the enemy's bomber formations. Who knows how many of those 40 tanks, for example, will ever reach the front, or when? Who can say if the repair shops will get their spare parts in time, and if they will be able to complete their repairs within the specified time at all? I shall at once report the matter to the Führer." He speaks angrily, then falls silent. As I fly back to the front, my mind is much concerned with what I have just heard. What is the purpose of these misleading and false reports? Is it due to slovenliness, or is it intentional? In either case, it helps the enemy. Who and what circles are committing these enormities, I don't know. I break my journey at Belgrade, and as I come in to land at Zemlin, US 4-engined bomber formations appear heading towards the airfield. As I taxi in, I see the whole personnel of the aerodrome running away. There are some hills to the west of the runway in which tunnels have apparently been cut to serve as shelters. I see the formation straight ahead of me a short distance from the airfield. This does not look any too good. I sprint after the stream of people as fast as I can in my fur boots. I just enter the tunnel as the first stick of bombs explodes on the aerodrome, raising a gigantic mushroom of smoke. I cannot believe it possible that anything can remain intact. After a few minutes, the smoke cloud thins a little and I walk back to the airfield. Almost everything is destroyed. Beside the wreckage stands my faithful Ju-87, riddled with splinters, but the engine is undamaged and so is the undercarriage. The essential parts of the control system still function. I look for a strip of ground off the actual runway suitable for takeoff and am glad when I am airborne again. Loyally and gallantly, my wounded kite carries me over the southeastern zone back to my wing at Husi. During my absence, a Romanian Ju-87 flight has been attached to us. The crews consist mainly of officers. Some of them have a certain flying experience, but we soon discover that it is better if they only fly as a flight with us in close formation. Otherwise, the number of casualties on every sortie is always high. The enemy fighters bother them especially, and it takes them some little time to realize through experience that with a slow aircraft in formation, it is not absolutely necessary to be shot down. The wing staff has gone over to Focke-Wulf 190s. Our first squadron has been temporarily withdrawn from operations for an 8 weeks rest to an airfield in the rear of Sächsisch Regen. Here, old stager Ju-87 pilots go back to school on the one-seater type. In the long run, all our units may have to do the same, as the last production series of Ju-87s has still to be completed, after which no more aircraft of this type are to be built. Therefore, while at Husi, I personally practice flying between sorties in one of the wing staff's new FW-190s, so that there shall be no reason for my being withdrawn from operations. I finish up my self-training by going out straight away on 1 or 2 sorties in the frontal area with the new type and feel quite safe in it. And there we go. Rudel is, again, getting showered with awards, some specifically tailored to his exploits. But next to that, there are other things to talk about. Let's start with his meeting with the Führer, where the old man is telling him about what turned out to be the German nuclear weapons program. Now, the veracity of this program was contested for a while, but today has been clearly established as fact. Germany's nuclear ambitions began with the Uranverein, or the Uranium Club, initiated in 1939. The group included prominent scientists like Werner Heisenberg, Otto Hahn, and Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker, some of the brightest minds in physics. Their goal was to explore nuclear fission and develop weapons-grade technology. Early progress included experiments to achieve a controlled chain reaction. German scientists investigated using uranium and heavy water as moderators in nuclear reactors. By 1941, they had isolated the challenges of enrichment and reactor design, but significant roadblocks hindered further progress. A critical obstacle was the scarcity of heavy water, primarily sourced from the Norsk hydro plant in Norway. Allied sabotage operations like the famous Telemark raid effectively disrupted this supply chain. Additionally, Germany faced organizational issues. Unlike the centralized and well-funded Manhattan Project, the German program was fragmented across competing institutions, including the military and civilian research groups. The lack of coordination prevented any unified push towards weaponization. Perhaps most notably, German scientists underestimated the feasibility and urgency of developing a nuclear bomb. Werner Heisenberg later claimed they had deliberately avoided designing a bomb for ethical reasons, though this is debated among historians. Their focus remained on reactor development, not on enriching uranium or producing plutonium at the scale required for a bomb. By contrast, the Manhattan Project rapidly advanced from theory to application. With a budget exceeding $2 billion then, which is equivalent to nearly $30 billion today, a vast industrial infrastructure, and an army of scientists led by figures like Robert Oppenheimer, the United States developed and tested atomic bombs by 1945, as you know. Germany's nuclear program, meanwhile, produced limited results. By the war's end, they had conducted reactor experiments but failed to achieve a sustained chain reaction. Their work never approached the sophistication or scale of the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project's success forever changed warfare and global politics, while Germany's nuclear ambitions ended as little more than a historical footnote. One should add, however, that designs for a submarine-towed, sea-launched, nuclear-tipped cruise missile had already been developed, with plans in place to fire such a weapon at New York City to deter the United States from continuing the war effort. This, as you know, did not come to pass, but I will put a picture of the design drawing on screen for you. Another interesting tidbit is the Soviet fighter ace that has a fierce battle with Rudel at treetop level and after a prolonged fight crashed into some woods. Now, of course, I had to find out who that man was, and I went and did some research based on the data points provided. So, he was a Russian fighter pilot who was awarded Hero of the Soviet Union multiple times and who died in early 1944. So I looked up the lists of recipients of this award. 4-time and 3-time award winners were easy to rule out, since they were either high-ranking officers like Marshal Zhukov or politicians, or they survived the war. That left me with the double recipients. There were 154 double recipients, and I looked into the ones matching the data points. However, there were no matching results. Then I realized that I am an idiot, and I just googled the terms Hans-Ulrich Rudel Soviet fighter ace, and lo and behold, the fourth or so hit returned a result. The result being Colonel Lev Lvovich Shestakov, a Lag 3 pilot with 450 missions and 18 air victories to his name. Shestakov, who went by the call sign Sokol, meaning falcon, apparently harbored a personal vendetta against Rudel and went out actively looking for him. His fate is history, as the date and location when and where he went missing match the circumstances in the book. Only he received the Hero of the Soviet Union award just once, but the exaggeration may very well have been Soviet or even German propaganda. Lev Shestakov died at the age of 28. Next, we have Field Marshal Göring, huntsman extraordinaire. For those that don't know, Göring is relatively famous for his extravagant persona, often wearing fantasy uniforms while on duty. Göring also loved hunting, and just for this pastime even had a special country residence constructed in the north of the German state of Brandenburg. Called Karin Hall after his late wife, he used it extensively for recreation as well as state visits. The residence building complex alone was massive, totaling around 11,000 square meters, which are almost 120,000 square feet. Fun fact, he also operated an intricate and rather large model train set in one of the rooms. Don't believe me? I will put it on screen for you. The complex was blown up at the end of the war, but then, in a twist of fate, rebuilt by communist East Germany and used for the exact same thing: hunting for the elites. Although it is rumored that the game in the adjoining forest was deliberately overfed so as to be unable to run away because the communist leaders of the East German Communist Party apparently weren't as good on foot as the Nazis were. And there you go. Interesting episode for sure. I hope you liked it and maybe you learned something new. See you again next time. Cheers.